I hope you enjoyed that video and welcome back. The thing to understand about scientific management is it's not that old. People really weren't thinking about this until at least the Industrial Revolution, and it really took some time after that. In terms of what managers did and how they could make their businesses most productive, they started out fairly simply, which was they would try to carefully select workers who possessed the skills and abilities that matched the needs of the task, train those workers to perform those tasks, and establish rules and procedures. And that's where they stopped, which we still do all of those things. I wouldn't say we stop now, but we still do all those things. We go through an interview process, we look at resumes, we're trying to find just the right worker, and then we train that worker, and we teach them the rules and what procedures of how we do that. I know my job at Illusovic, we do all of those things. We do more than that, but it's not like those original people who were thinking about it were wrong insofar as trying to select the right people, trying to train them, and have them follow the rules and procedures of the company. They were also, when they were more enlightened, concerned with establishing a fair or acceptable level of performance for a task. This is what you're expected to get accomplished during the day. Okay? And develop a pay system that provides a reward for performance above that acceptable level. Okay? That's often what you used to hear is called, and we don't have it so much anymore, but it still does exist in some places, piece rate. Okay? Generally, people were either paid by the day, but more often they were paid by the piece rate, which meant for everything they finished, they made a certain amount. And the thought is that encouraged them to get those things done as quickly as possible. Of course, the disincentive there is that you're also rewarding people who are going so fast they're making mistakes. But no system was perfect, and for those who were trying to pay their best workers the best amount, this worked out really well. Okay? They also needed to pay well enough to get people who would come to work for them while not paying so much that they put themselves out of business. This is not a time that's known for being terribly enlightened. This was a very pro-management era. But the best businesses did definitely think about how they're paying. When they weren't doing the piecemeal rate, they were doing generally as a day rate. But even those people were trying to think about how to best pay their people. Famously, Henry Ford, when he was selling cars, had sold about as many cars as he could in a given year, and was trying to think of how do I sell more cars? I kind of have hit the limit of my market. And one of the things he came up with was doubling the pay of his employees, because the pay rate that he was paying them wouldn't allow them to be car owners. But by paying his employees more, in this case doubling, not only would his employees be able to now afford cars, but those people who he was competing with for employees would have to double theirs to match as well. So it had a multiplier effect, thereby causing a large number of people to go up in terms of their financial remuneration, the money they were making, and then be potential car buyers. And it worked. It worked. His sales went up dramatically after he did this. Next slide. So what's the point? Introduce what scientific management is to a degree, some of the basic people, or some of the people who were starting it, where it came out of. The point is that the first people who seriously thought about management thought the best way to improve workflow was to take a scientific approach. We had mentioned Mr. Taylor and his stopwatch, that he was very much measuring that, right? That they could solve worker productivity. One of the things that's going to be talked about in later in this lecture is the idea of soldiering, which was that people were intentionally not working as fast as they could. They were trying to solve this issue, and they thought, this is the scientific era. This is when the light bulb is being discovered. You have telegraph, telephone. You have a million different scientific achievements, to the point that a very famous gentleman in 1899 who was running the patent office said, that everything important had already been invented by 1899. Now, of course, he was wrong, but you have to understand the thinking in that the scientific approach was solving everything as far as they're concerned, and they could take a scientific approach to management. They also thought that matching the worker and the worker and the work was important, and that pay schemes matter. They didn't always think that people were just interchangeable tools. Of course, some did. And especially if we're going back, really, really deep into the Industrial Revolution, they saw people, children, whomever, as interchangeable tools. But we're not talking necessarily about those people. What we're talking is about the first people who were seriously thinking about how to manage best, how to do what is called the scientific management. These were the people who were saying, as far back as the early 1900s, hire better and you'll have a more effective workforce. Hire the right people for the right jobs. Okay? Now, it would eventually get more sophisticated, but the first people who were thinking about this, they were on the right track. Who you hire does matter. Frederick Taylor and his stopwatch, how people do their job does matter. These things, they were not wrong, they were incomplete, but they were not wrong. Okay? I would say those people who going back further, who were not thinking about it, who were just owning factories and saw people with interchangeable parts, they probably could have been more productive. And the first people coming at this and really trying to think about it made important changes. The Galbraiths, who we'll talk about next, Frederick Taylor, but some other people mentioned in that video there, they were on the right track. Next slide. So Frederick Taylor worked with a couple called Frank and Lillian Galbraith. They met Joseph Taylor. They actually worked together. They collaborated. But Taylor tended to focus too much for the Galbraiths on the individual worker and not how that worker fit into the flow, fit into the whole process. Taylor was excellent, really, really good at improving one worker's productivity, where the Galbraiths focused their efforts is on improving the entire factory, entire what's called the workflow. Okay? They thought about the processes and how those processes fit. Right? They did was try to break up and analyze every individual action necessary to perform tasks to each of its component actions. Find better ways to perform each of those component action, and then reorganize the action so that the action could be so that the action as a whole could be performed more efficiently. Okay? So, to analogize this to a football team, Frederick Taylor was really improving the running back. How could he run better? How could he run faster? How could he run more effectively, stronger? How could we improve this individual person? Right? The Galbraiths were looking at the team as a whole. How could the offensive line block to make the running back more productive? How could the quarterback fake doing something to get the attention of the defense so the running back didn't have as many people pursuing him? How could the wide receivers influence what's happening downfield so that if the running back did get past the line of scrimmage, that he could go for a while? Okay? They were looking at the whole field versus Taylor was looking at the individual player. This is still something, when you have efficiency experts, when you have people who are management consultants today, this is still what they're doing. Figuring out how to make the whole process run. The Galbraiths were really ahead of the time, even though most of the stuff they were doing was in the 10s and 20s. Their ideas are still many of the most important ideas out there today. It's still what people do. Okay? And I've given you 3 little videos there. They're each very short. And I would ask that you stop watching when you this comes when you stop watching this and watch those videos, and you get to know the Galbraiths. And how important what they're doing is. I think these are really great videos.